I would first like to thank President Sue for being such a generous host. Yes, am I on? Yes, you can hear. Good. I said I'd like to first thank President Sue for being such a generous host for this event, and I would also like to thank President Cho for remembering all about the dimensions of social welfare policy. If my students only remembered as much, I would feel like a successful teacher. I've been told that in translating English to Korean, it takes more words in Korean to express the same ideas as in English. And therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read my paper to try and ease the heavy burden on our translator. I'd like to thank Professor Chung, who first invited me out 20 years ago when we had the conference on the productive welfare state that he discussed earlier. And that conference was an intellectually stimulating event and something that had gotten started on this road towards following and analyzing the development of the Korean welfare state. When we met about 20 years ago to talk about productive welfare, we found that the three main components of productive welfare involved equality of opportunity to participate in production, financial transfers that would provide those temporarily excluded from the market with the necessary relief to enable rapid reemployment, and would allow those permanently excluded from the market to maintain a minimum standard of living. The third component involved measures that encourage self-support through suitable education and training. I'm slowing down my talking because I think I was going too fast. While recognizing the need to provide social support for people unable to work, mainly the disabled and the elderly, the main components of productive welfare placed a primary emphasis on work-oriented policies that were intended to produce self-sufficiency and productivity. In analyzing this development 20 years ago, I liken the productive welfare approach to the paradigm shift from the traditional welfare state to the enabling state. The core philosophy of the enabling state is easily summed up in the principle of public support for private responsibility, and that is the use of government in financing social welfare benefits and the use of the private sector, that is the family, civic organizations, NGOs, in taking responsibility for delivering these benefits and individuals taking responsibility for becoming self-sufficient. My assessment of the implications of the productive welfare model suggested that at that time I was concerned that the ultimate challenge that confronts productive welfare in Korea is to develop as more than a handmaiden to the market economy. That is, that social welfare should be more than simply a mechanism to create productivity. And while the architects of the model recognized the need for the state to do more than promote work, my concern was that welfare through work, that principle of productive welfare, might place too much emphasis on generating greater material production and not enough on a broader vision of social well-being. Although at that time, the significance and the outcome of the productive welfare paradigm and the reforms advanced under its auspices remained uncertain, there was little doubt that they represented a very ambitious agenda to expand the Korean welfare state. So just take a moment now, I'd like to look back at what's happened a little bit between 2000 and 2019, which we can think of as a period during which the Korean welfare state matured, a period of maturation. Indeed, over the last 2 decades, the Korean welfare state, along with the Korean economy, has rapidly matured, making progress on many fronts, increasing both the scope of welfare coverage and the fiscal capacity to pay for these benefits. I'd like you to look at the figures in my paper, if you have the paper, because I will refer to them as I go along in this lecture. And you don't have to know a whole lot of English just to check these figures, they're almost self-explanatory. Figure 1 shows that in 1998, Korea's GDP per capita was very, very low. It was about $17,000. It was considerably below the European Union and about half of France and Japan. By 2017, the GDP per capita almost doubled and became very close to the European Union average and just $1,000 below Japan. This is a remarkable economic development, almost miraculous. When you look at figure 1 and you see the slope of that line of increase, it's quite phenomenal what's happened in a relatively short period of time. And this was accompanied by the significant expansion of the Korean welfare state. This is exemplified by a number of developments. For instance, the National Pension Service, which was introduced in 1988, was reformed under President Kim Dae-jung's administration in 1998 and later in 2007. And I just recently read, I gather that current reforms are being discussed and debated for necessary reasons. Although the National Pension Service has grown to be the world's 3rd largest pension fund with $564 billion in assets, it is predicted to be depleted by 2057. All that money is going to be gone. And the reason for this is the falling birth rate, low economic growth. In 2008, Korea initiated the Earned Income Tax Credit, which provided financial incentives for low-income workers. And the same year, it initiated the mandatory long-term care insurance. So a lot of the infrastructure of the Korean welfare state has been set in very, very recent times. We're not talking going back to the 1800s when Bismarck started the pension system in Germany. As shown in figure 2, across the OECD countries, the annual growth in expenditure for long-term care averaged 4.6% between 2005 and 2015. Korea's growth averaged 32%. That spending was an outlier. It's at the far right end of this graph, and the line actually goes up much higher. There's a break in it which shows that it's a much higher line than that. Okay. The reason for Korea is looking like an outlier is mainly because due to the fact that coverage for long-term care was just implemented in 2008. It's relatively young, and so when you start from a base of 0, growth rates as a percentage look very, very dramatic. And it happened amidst a rapidly aging population, so there was a lot of pent-up demand for this care. Overall, as shown in figure 3, this is on page 4, between 1990 and 2018, Korea experienced a proportional increase in social spending that was relatively high compared to the other OECD countries. As when you look at public expenditure as a percentage of GDP and the rate of growth in Korea was proportionally higher than most of the other OECD countries. However, overall, public spending on social welfare programs is still, yes, okay, get it? Overall, it's still less than half the average for the OECD countries. And many of these countries have a lower GDP per capita than Korea. That is, many countries that are not as wealthy as Korea are spending more. I'll be good with this. Okay, sorry. Does this sound better? Yes. All right. Although the level of public expenditure in Korea was well below the OECD average, when it comes to per capita spending on early education and care for children, Korea ranks well above the OECD. As illustrated in figure 4, only the Scandinavian countries and France spent more on children under 5 than Korea. And the Korean expenditures do not include the significant level of spending on private education. I'm sure you're all aware of it, and those of you who have children are probably ready to take them to the tutorial as soon as this conference ends at 5 o'clock. What I've heard is that it averaged $254 per child in 2017, and that the level of spending has reached a point that some people claim the Korean families are over-investing in private after-school tutoring programs, a situation that they described as an educational arms race among Korean families with children. Well, that was just a brief look back. Now I'd like to look forward and from this point and see what the current situation is and where we may be headed. As the Korean welfare state has been maturing over the recent decades, promising pensions for the elderly, long-term care for disabled people, income subsidies for low-income workers, training for the unemployed, and high-quality early education for children, the Korean population has been rapidly aging due to a precipitous decline in the fertility rate and a steep rise in life expectancy. So with the fertility rate plummeting from 6.5 births in 1950 to less than 1, I think it's 0.98 in 2017, Korea stands out as having the lowest fertility in the advanced industrialized democracies that make up the membership of the OECD. In 2018, the fertility rate of less than 1 was even lower than initially estimated in the UN population projections shown in figure 3. So if you look at figure 3, you'll see that the UN population projections now have Korea going quite below the level of 1 for the fertility rate. And if you look at these projections, what they foresee is that the Korean fertility rate will remain far below the replacement rate of 2.1 well into the 22nd century. That is, if you don't do anything to change the situation. While the fertility rate is falling, life expectancy is on the rise. Korea's life expectancy at 83 years is considerably higher than the worldwide average. In fact, it is the 9th highest in the world. And it's expected to keep rising. So if you look at figure 9, figure 6, yes, if you see figure 6, you can see the Korean the life expectancy is supposed to be going up. The UN Population Division estimates that it will climb to 95 years by the 22nd century. Before the end of this century, many Koreans can look forward to a lifespan that will be almost twice as long as the worldwide life expectancy was in 1960. Increasing longevity joined with declining fertility rates are responsible for the demographic transition to an aging society. And this is happening throughout the world. This isn't only in Korea. It tends to be a bit more extreme here, but many of the countries, Italy, Spain, Germany, almost all of Western Europe is below replacement rate, and some of them are far below replacement rate. Over the next 35 years, the number of people 65 and older as a proportion of the working age population is expected to almost double from 13 to 25% worldwide. That's in a worldwide figure. As illustrated in Figure 7, among the OECD countries, Korea is projected to have one of the largest increases in the dependency ratio between 2000 and 2050. By 2050, the Korean dependency ratio will reach close to 0.9. What that means is there will be almost one person 65 years and older, presumably out of the labor force, for each person in the working age population of 15 to 64. When you have a pay-as-you-go financing system as you have in Korea, what that means is you're going to have one person who's working, who's having to pay for the entire benefit of somebody who's retired. That's not sustainable. Well, it is sustainable if the benefit is just reduced very, very low. Or what will happen, of course, is the age of retirement will increase as it has around most of the Western world. With fewer children being born as parents are living longer, the demographic transition to an aging society generates an increasing challenge for the state's capacity to fund the rising fiscal obligations of the Korean welfare state. That is, old age pensions, disability services, earned income tax credits, daycare, children's allowances, and the like. As the proportion of the working population diminishes, there are fewer people contributing to these benefits, and there are more elderly people and disabled people demanding to receive these benefits. The demographic transition also poses an immense challenge to the family's traditional duties for the care of its members, as there will be less children available to exercise familial responsibility for the personal care of the elderly parents and grandparents, and the shrinking pool of younger workers tends to raise the cost of labor. So this is going to have multiple impacts. And this can drive companies to less expensive reasons. The impact on family life of the demographic transition to an aging society is compounded by the changing social norms concerning marriage, divorce, and sexual mores, which have further disrupted the family's capacity to care for vulnerable members. In its most extreme form, this change has been characterized as the deinstitutionalization of family life, and it's exemplified in the growing importance of individual autonomy, delayed parenthood, increasing rates of cohabitation, divorce, and single-parent households. None of these represent traditional structure of family life or the obligations of family life that we understand that has been the case traditionally. With the advent of the modern welfare state in most of the advanced industrialized societies, families are no longer units of economic production where survival depends on a sexual division of labor and relationships are bound by instrumental responses to economic necessity. In this context, family relationships increasingly serve expressive functions, nurturing, affection, and emotional gratification. As family has become less of a unit of economic production that is needed for survival, and more a venue for individuals' emotional satisfaction, the ties of family relations have become increasingly vulnerable to the fulfillment of emotional expectations, and this has diminished the stability of family life. Generally speaking, the ties and stability of family life are on the wane. They are weakening. Marriage is taking place later, becoming less common in many countries. At the same time, divorce has become more common in many regions, and Korea is no exception. If you look at figure 3, the figures show that between 1990 and 2016, Korea experienced one of the largest declines in marriage among the OECD countries. And it was one of the few countries in which the divorce rate increased. The proportion of married households has declined from 79.6% in 1990 to 66.6% in 2010. One of the reasons for this, we might imagine, is suggested by a recent report from Kihasa. And this report reveals 3 or 4 out of 10 unmarried Koreans between ages 20 and 44 are dating, with even fewer getting married. That is 30 to 40% of those between 20 and 44 who aren't married aren't even dating. In Korea, as Younghwa Kim notes, the Confucian emphasis on strong family relationships, altruistic paternalism, social harmony, and hard work is certainly a positive set of cultural attributes around which to design social supports which provide public measures that reinforce private efforts and responsibilities. However, the declining fertility rate and the fraying bonds of family life hinder the implementation of the enabling states' policies to advance private responsibility of families for the care and protection of vulnerable individuals. In response to the declining birth rate and the fraying bonds of family life, in 2005, the Korean government initiated the Basic Plan on Low Birth Rates in an Aging Society. Since then, a wide range of family-friendly benefits has been made available to assist with childbirth, child-rearing, and these include supports for child care costs, national public child care facilities, full day care services, priority for national rental housing, exemption of vehicle purchase taxes, happiness cards, medical costs for fertility, paternity leave, and others. So a lot of measures have been implemented to try and support family life, try and support increasing the fertility rate. As shown in figure 9, and this is probably the most interesting chart in this paper, the Korean government's public spending on vast packages of benefits as a percent of GDP climbed tenfold between 2000 and 2017. And that is once the Korean government decided they want to try and do something called family friendly, whoosh, they put a lot of money into it. But if you look at that chart, unfortunately, despite the significant increase on family benefits, the effort was largely unsuccessful in stemming the decline of the Korean fertility rate, which fell steadily over this period. That is, even as more money was continually being put in, the fertility rate continued to go down. The data in figure 9 raised serious questions about the potential impact of the conventional packages of family policy benefits on childbearing. That is, to what extent did the conventional, the way people think about it conventionally, make a difference for childbearing, for fertility rates? In Korea, the fertility rate declined as spending increased. In the United States, which spent a lower proportion of its GDP on family benefits, it has a higher fertility rate than Korea. It had the highest fertility rate in all the countries in this figure, and it spends the lowest proportion on so-called family-friendly benefits. The fertility rate in Norway has been declining since 2009. It fell recently to 1.5, which is way below replacement rate. That's a very serious issue also. And Norway was continuing to increase their expenditure on these so-called child-friendly family policies. And it had the highest level of spending amongst these countries from the OECD. In Hungary, which also spends a relatively high percentage of the GDP, if you look at the table there, on family policy, the fertility rate was 1.4 in 2018. Again, a very problematic fertility rate, well below replacement. These indecisive results remind us of the history of children's allowances in France. And that is, after World War II, the French were having a population crisis, and they decided to introduce children's allowances as a policy initiated to increase the fertility, to increase births. So they initiated this children's allowance after World War II. And what happened was the French birth rate went up, which suggests that, well, something interesting is going on, except for one fact. If you look at the United States during that period, which had no children's allowance initiated, the birth rate also went up, just as much as the French. And if you look at Sweden during that period, which had a big children's allowance, the birth rate went down. So as soon as you get off looking at one country and start to make international comparisons over time, these policies, the effectiveness of them become highly questioned. Indeed, to date, the overall impact on fertility and marriage rates of various family policy measures has been ambiguous empirically to date. The European experience was studied by Joel Slebos, who analyzed 42 multivariate studies of family-friendly policies, and he found the evidence inconclusive and contradictory. In East Asia, both the moderate tax breaks for newborns in Hong Kong and the more comprehensive package of family policies in Singapore have been in place for many years. If you want to compare to East Asian countries, one which has a very modest policy of providing benefits for children and one which has a very comprehensive policy, despite these differences in the levels of support for marriage and childbearing, these countries have almost equally low rates of fertility, low around 1.4 or even below that. One of the reasons suggested for these inconclusive results of family policy is that most of the expenditures on this conventional package of family benefits are designed to make it easier for parents to maintain labor force participation, sometimes referred to as harmonizing work and family life. These benefits involve early education and childcare, maternity and parental leave, childcare tax credits, and family benefits. They emphasize objectives related to advancing gender equality, to dual earner employment, and to economic productivity. Policies designed to balance work and family life are often referred to in the literature as family-friendly. Some analysts, however, and myself included, observe that market-friendly is a more apt label. As Jane Lewis explains, family policies in the European Union, and I quote, have explicitly been linked to promotion of women's employment in order to further the economic growth and competition agenda. It's also been argued that these family-friendly policies actually encourage what Josta Esping-Andersen once identified as defamiliarization. I don't know how you translate that in Korean. It's very difficult to even pronounce in English, okay? But what it means is not so difficult to grasp. That is, these so-called family policies, defamiliarization means that they promote the shift of household labor to paid employment in the marketplace. This in turn requires that the performance of care, nurturing, and other family functions is outsourced to the market and the state. And as a result, these policies, the consequence of these policies is that the state and the market end up assuming the core functions of family life. As I've shown in Figure 10, Koreans work more than people in almost every other country in the OECD. They're 50% longer than workers in Germany and Denmark. I've heard recently that they just lowered the rate by 2 hours, I think, from 52 to 50 or something. I don't know if you're in a cocoon here, but the rest of the industrialized world just doesn't work like this. And when you put this many hours into work in the market, that doesn't leave a whole lot for family. Not only that, not only do they work more, but what's even, from a cultural point of view, as American looking at this, is more interesting. If you look at Figure 11, it shows that the Koreans would prefer to spend even more time working. When asked in an attitude study, would you like to work less or more? Most of the countries, most of the people said, no, we like to work less. The Koreans were next to the Mexicans who wanted to work more hours. From this, one might conclude from this that the objectives of productive welfare had a meaningful impact. Everybody sort of absorbed the cultural design that said, okay, we want to be more productive and you work harder. However, between the amount of daily hours parents spend working and that children spend in preschool, public school, and private school, Korean family life is stressed for time. And some people say, it has been said, that in raising children, the greatest expression of parental love is the gift of time. Not of money, but the gift of time. Family benefits such as free daycare, preschools, a $500 prenatal allowance, $200 monthly allowances for the first child, do not seem to be strong enough public supports to promote private responsibility of families, that is, marriage, procreation, and childbearing. The social benefits closely associated with family policies are concerned with facilitating employment that will allow individuals economic independence, that will increase material well-being and advance gender equality. More generally, social welfare policies are evaluated according to a range of outcomes. That is, when you ask how is this policy doing, there are a range of questions that people tend to ask. Typically, it looks at has it increased employment? Has it made more material well-being? Has it generated gender equality? What's the impact on poverty, on access to health, on economic inequality, on social inclusion, and the like? So now you've got a new design, a new model for the inclusive social welfare. These are all worthy objectives. But the pursuit of productivity and material well-being do not address the question of what is a wholesome family life, what is a desirable childhood, and what is a good society. Is it simply work, work, work? Can family policies be designed to strengthen the bonds of intergenerational solidarity? Can they promote the solidarity and vitality of family life and its capacity to perform the essential functions of procreation, socialization of the young, care for dependent members, and social cohesion? Do social policies enhance the family's capacity for nurturing, caring, and socialization of children? These questions suggest the need to rethink the so-called family-friendly policies, how they're defined and how they are evaluated. I'll give you some examples. Consider the policy of offering parents of young children the opportunity to use subsidized child care, or the choice to receive a cash payment equivalent to public child care. A subsidy that would be considered a kind of notional salary for providing care to their own children. Out-of-home preschool care for children is very expensive. Child care is labor-intensive. You cannot have robots do it. There is no economy of scale to it. When you have a 2-year-old child, you can't have one person watching 6 of them, even 3 of them. We all have 2 hands, and that's about what it takes for 2-year-olds. It's labor-intensive. In California, quality care, that is daycare for children, is about $20,000 to $22,000 a year. And this is the University of California at Berkeley. This is almost subsidized a bit from the university. If a student wants to put their kid in that center, that's what the cost is. The faculty cost the same thing. Several European countries offer cash for home care, but at a much lower rate than the price of subsidized public child care services. Equivalent payment for home care has been a topic of heated debate, and this is because cash for home care is perceived as keeping mothers out of the labor force and creating a large gap in their resumes, which would limit further employment opportunities. That is, it is seen as inhibiting gender equality in the labor force. As it's shown in Figure 12, there are different ways of analyzing, I say various lenses, for judging the impact of social policies. Seen through the analytic lens of increasing labor force participation, for example, the provision of publicly subsidized daycare services is preferable in that it promotes a high level of employment among parents with young children, a higher level than publicly subsidized home care allowances, where some of these people stay home and not go to work. Similarly, from the perspective of gender equality, the impact of subsidized out-of-home care provides women more equal opportunity for labor force participation. In contrast, however, viewed through the analytic lens of strengthening the intergenerational bonds of family life, The impact of providing parents at least a choice between public daycare services and home care subsidy is seen as affording those who prefer to invest their time and effort in the care, nurturing, and socialization of their children the same opportunity as those who would rather be employed in the real work in the formal economy. I say that recognizing that part of the real work in the formal equality is real work in daycare centers. And so many of these mothers actually do work in daycare centers. Another case in point, there's a similar situation regarding cash or care in the policy provision for long-term care. Professor Kwan noted this in his talk about this. Unlike Germany, for instance, where recipients can opt to receive long-term care benefits in cash or in kind, in Korea the basic provision of long-term care is offered in kind, as in services, except in very rare situations in rural areas where there may be no services available. But basically it's a service in kind. Offering long-term care recipients a choice opens the opportunity to compensate family members who might wish to provide home care for their parents and other relatives that cannot afford to leave paid employment in order to do so. Again, their paid employment could also involve providing home care, long-term services for the elderly in other institutions. By limiting benefits to services, the long-term care policy reduces the opportunity for the expression of intergenerational solidarity in family life. Rethinking family policy raises an important set of issues about the impact of social welfare policies on the institution of family. And this institution of family is the basic building block of society. In pursuit of increased productivity and material well-being, to what degree should the state promote the shift of household labor to the market, which diminishes parental opportunities to provide care, nurturing, socialization, and mutual support to family members? In the name of balancing work and family life, to what extent should the performance of care, nurturing, and other family functions be outsourced to the market and the state? In seeking to provide public support for private responsibility, Korea's enabling state encounters a challenge to maintain the balance between social policies that assist people to gain independence through work and policies that support private efforts to strengthen the bonds of family life.